Welcome to another episode of the Mindset Athlete Podcast with me, James Roberts, transformational coach, two-time Paralympian, and TEDx speaker. I have another awesome episode for you today, so let's get straight into it. This is the Mindset Athlete Podcast, and I'm your host, James Roberts. And on today's show, I've got Lois Hollis. Lois shifts our opinions on the taboo subject, shame and guilt. She's a Shameguilt educator, counselor, filmmaker, author who coined the phrase Shameguilt. Lois has always been a trailblazer. She's helped develop one of the first kidney hemodialysis units in the US at Thomas Jefferson University in 1966. Today, she not only shows us why Shameguilt has led us to believe we are victims incapable of stellar lives, but also how to make friends with our inner critic and kick shame, guilt out of our lives. Lois was dying at 55 and today at 79 rollerblades with her grandson because she healed from the shame guilt of an abusive childhood. Lois was scarred with brain traumas, broken jaws, heart, liver illnesses with 30 years of migraine headaches. Her impactful story shows us the immense power we reclaim when we release the shame guilt in herself. She has lectured widely, including Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, events and podcast interviews in 15 countries. Her free books, spirit readings, and films that make shame guilt visible will teach us how and why we need to know the trickery of shame guilt energy to accomplish our dreams. So without further ado, Lois, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. That was a little wordy. I've got to make it shorter.
That's all right. No, I'm one for. We'll touch on inner criticism for straight off the bat, because obviously people probably could tell that my voice changes between the introduction and obviously how I'm talking now. So I'm not going to throw my mum under the bus, but as in, it's a criticism I get from my family a lot in terms of my tonality in my voice is very, I'm going to be harsh on myself, monotonous and very monotone when I'm reading something, and there's not a lot of emotion that goes into it. We touched upon this a little bit off air before we started recording. You talked about the frequency levels that obviously shame and guilt reside at versus there's probably only going to be a select few of individuals that obviously ever ascertain enlightenment. So it's more and more like the monks and people that go into a religious from that perspective. Talk to the audience how low a frequency shame and guilt actually resides at.
Well, I'm taking the information from Dr. David Hawkins, who now lives in heaven. And he did a wonderful thing for us because he gave each emotion a numerical value. We can understand math. When they get a math reading, we know it's true. And someone says, oh, this is better than that. You say, hey, prove it. So this is why I really like what he has done, because I say most people in the planet are operating in guilt, shame. What did I do wrong? How can I fix that? We're also told you should never regret anything and never be angry, be forgiving, be compassionate. That is true. But they give us shame guilt, which is the lowest frequency. So this is very important for everybody. Doesn't matter what you're doing, because shame guilt comes in at a 10. And after 10, that's it. There's no life after a 10. Your body can't vibrate anything less than 10. So if you're operating at the lowest vibration, you're not really using your body or your mind or your heart or your soul. So the highest that you can be at is 700,000. That's 7 with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros to the 30th power. And that's enlightenment, as James has spoken before. So the gradation between that and 10, you can see that you're really shortchanging yourself. So my purpose, my mission is to get people out of shame guilt, because shame guilt has no value. It can only hurt you. Shame guilt is used by our government, religions, your mother, your father, your enemies, your friends, the food people, the car people. Everybody wants you to buy what you're supposed to buy. And if you don't do it, they shame you, because that's the name of the game here. At least I've been in 15 countries, and it's the same, if it's different language. They go, oh, I know that one. I know that one. And I often frequent the thrift stores, and I found a book, How to Be a Jewish Mother, for $1. So I said, hey, why not? I'm not Jewish, but I thought it would be interesting. And I will read one sentence to you, because it's quite amazing that these words are written in a book to teach parents how to raise their children. And it's okay, because it's written in a book. Make guilt work. Underlining all techniques of Jewish motherhood is the ability to plant, cultivate, and harvest guilt. Control guilt, and you control the child. Also, let your child hear you sigh every day because of the extra burden you have because you take care of him. If you don't do this, you have to show him how you suffer.
What period of time is the book from, though?
1963. Now, there's another very instrumental philosopher in the 1800s who wanted all children to be gentlemen. And he said, they have to be beaten because they have to be shown that in these things you have to do the rules and you have to do this and so forth. So they would beat them to make sure that they would understand the severity of it. However, the beatings lost their power after a while, because, being an athletic person, your ego says, you don't bother me. You don't want to take it. So they said, you must add shame, guilt to the beatings so that it'd be more effective. And that became the law of the land, to shame a kid while he's being beaten for something he did wrong or didn't do. So we're taught this way, James. And that's why we have an inner critic within us who does the same thing, because the inner critic was taught what the parents and the government and the culture, etc., have taught us. So we need to understand that it's not part of us. It's an energy. And that's why I am different, telling people it's not an emotion. It affects emotions. Like what happens to your computer when you get a computer virus?
Ooh,
Don't even mention it.
Well,
right?
as in, if you've already opened it, the virus, then.
Yeah, but also nothing works properly, and you have to get a virus.
That's the whole purpose of it, isn't it? Well, I used the Trojan horse. That's the whole purpose of it.
Yeah. James, that's so perfect you said that, because shame guilt is a Trojan horse. Okay? It's used to make you a victim. Think about it. It doesn't empower you to be all that you can be. It's an energy that puts upon you, like a computer virus. You don't see it, but you know what happens to your computer. And what do? You get a virus removal program. And that's what we have to get, a shame guilt removal program. I teach people how actually take it out of themselves so that it's no longer burdening them.
How long did it take you though, Lois, to be able to do it for yourself after what
Well,
you'd gone through?
well, I still work at it because it's part of our lives. I'm not saying it's a good part of our lives. It's a part of our lives because we're always in battle with it, even though we don't know it. And we need to make friends with our inner critic. I was dying at 55, and luckily I found a Navy SEAL chiropractor healer, and he really helped me to heal. And but then I had to heal from the emotional traumas. And someone said to me, Lois, what do you do about shame? And I went, oh my goodness, what an odd word. Because nobody mentioned shame in 1980. I mean, heck, they don't even want to hear it here now. Well, they go a bit better, but nobody mentioned that word. And then I went to the library and I found a Bradshaw's book, Shame is a Sickness of the Soul. And I have the ability to find different ways of doing things. I had a near-death experience in childhood, and I think that's part of the reason why I'm able to find different ways of doing things. And one paper wants to know what school I went to. Well, I went to God's school, and that's just the way it is. So once I learned about shame guilt, I saw it in my life, and I could identify it and then get rid of it and don't accept it from other people. And I would talk to my depression. I got tired of talking to the therapist. So I talked to myself and said, hi, depression, how are you? Hi, anger, how are you? I don't talk to shame guilt, but shame guilt's a negative force. Shame guilt is a negative force. It turns all our positive emotions to negative ones, like compassion turns to depression. Intuition turns to anxiety. Passion turns to anger. So we don't have like positive emotions and negative emotions. It's just emotion. And they have a positive and a negative aspect. So logically, one would say, well, let's just get rid of the shame guilt. And they all turn back to positive. I'm like, that's a very good idea.
So
If you
what's
don't
your
get rid of the shame guilt energy, then we have a problem. Okay, I think we had a little stop there.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a freeze then. So what's your take on this, Lois? Jordan Peterson, I'm going to paraphrase because I'm probably going to make a mistake with it slightly. He said that obviously our emotions make up like they're almost like personality traits that, anger, like I'll use the negative ones because generally those are the ones that people want to get rid of. But as they're more towards personality traits, would you be in the same opinion of that, or would you disagree slightly?
Well, you can say it's a personality trait. I tend to get angry. There's nothing wrong with that, but they are emotions. We get caught up into lots of words, and that makes it more difficult to find an answer. That's why I can tell you all about the medulla oblongata, the occipital and the parietal lobes and all. Is that going to help you? No. I'm just telling you that shame guilt is an energy, like love is an energy. Love comes to us, and what do we feel? Joy, and happiness, and confidence. And we can press 1,000,000 pounds and hit every basketball, and compassion, and we're loving, and we're giving, and we have confidence. But that comes from love. And on the other side, we have shame guilt energy. And it brings us depression, anxiety, hatred. I'm not good enough, so forth and so on. So this is a little different approach, but it actually helps your mind understand it because you're not, shame is bad and guilt is good. And people go back and forth and try to wobble between the two when it's really the same energy.
I would never say guilt is good. I'm gonna
Guilt is
share
not
I'm gonna
good.
share this, and hopefully my mum doesn't. I want to say that she wouldn't kill me, but as in, um, my parents never resorted to violence to discipline me because it didn't work. Because not that I didn't obviously shape up and ship shape. I used to get the silent treatment. So the element of that's probably what you're talking about with the Jewish mother as the book, as that's one way of enforcing your dominance
You're,
over another individual from a psychological warfare, as in that's a form of torture to be able to give people. That's probably something that being an only child I'd crave to put people's attention. So the aspect of somebody justifying guilt as a good thing, it's probably shown my evolution as a person to kind of be able to say, well, it's probably been used a lot throughout my life, especially in sport, to kind of going, well, if you don't do it, this person somewhere else in the world is doing that more, and it generally gets an extra ounce of I don't want to use the word energy, but as in you'd find an extra point perspective of reserve that you didn't know was there. But in terms of, and it's only because a client asked me, I think it was last year, could you not utilize it all the time? Dark energy. I was like, I personally would choose not to. Maybe to get a task over the line like really quickly, it'd be effective, but I wouldn't want to stay in that for too long. It'd be like, okay, that task is now done. I need to go and do whatever meditative technique that I would utilize at my disposal to stem the tide of that and get some sort of equilibrium at best, if not try to get back into the positive. But I would probably choose more so to lean into the positives, more so now as a coach. I wouldn't even contemplate negative. I do it for sport because ultimately it's well, it's almost I almost created an alter ego, but I'm aware of that as in I can't be passive in a sporting thing because ultimately I'm a very kind person, so thus I need to change it. So I will do that through what we were discussing off air of vibration and through music to alter my state.
music is wonderful. Yes. The reason I said guilt, some people say it's guilt because religions call it a moral virtue. Because if you have guilt, you're going to repent for your sins. And there's nothing good about guilt. There's nothing good about guilt. It's just not guilt. You can have other emotions that will forward you to, like we spoke in the beginning about you wanting to give to somebody. You want someone to achieve something. That is your cookie. That's what you want to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Guilt and I call it shame guilt because it's like a nickel. It has a positive and it has a heads and a tail, but it's still a nickel. And that's shame guilt. It's still shame guilt. So I put them together so our mind will stay focused. And in your business, the mind's got to be focused.
Well, I've got to give credit to sport. That it's given me singular focus, and I explain why I mean this to everybody. Is I get accredited to very good positive attributes in sport. Determination, self-discipline, and the list is endless. I can also give negative ones to go alongside that. Self-centered, egotistical.
Mm-hmm.
And all the athletes will resonate with that because it's like it was true. It's I'm not dismissing that it's a bad trait, but those things, there's a singular
Yes.
focus on you are the center of the world, which I think as I grew older, I give credit to my mom on this one because she was very present throughout that entire part of my life, and obviously still to this day, that she saw the highs, she saw the lows, she saw everything in between, but the immediate family didn't. And obviously I was very, very well, a very nice person to be around sometimes if I didn't win or I didn't get my way in terms of the result working in my favor, which obviously sport doesn't work like that. There's always going to be a winner and there's always going to be a loser. But as a result of that conversation, gosh, it only seems like yesterday, but it's almost 20
Isn't it
years ago.
amazing how time is?
Well,
Time
it's
is.
it's it's only one of those things. It's how much you give. But as in you are nearly 80 years old, but you could have no longer been here 25 years ago and we wouldn't be having this conversation. But as a result, I kind of went, it probably took a number of years to be able to kind of come from another person's perspective to kind of go, well, she's right. I need to be able to maybe park that emotion for the moment to be able to. Well, my aunt and my mother went to saw me the other side of the world to compete in China. So it's like, and this is quite a funny story.
Mhm.
We ended up finishing fifth in the Paralympics, and I hadn't seen my family for like weeks because of training camps and whatnot, and we were not allowed to see family in the run up to the competition. But I said to the first time when I saw my mom, I was like, we thrown the kitchen sink at it, and it still wasn't good enough. And she said to me, "Where's James gone?" That's in the space of 2 years. I've gone from being not able to lean out of what we're talking about, shame and guilt of, oh, I've not done very well. In the grand scheme of things, I think, okay, we are now nearly 20 years on. Finishing sixth in the world in your first world championships is not bad going in the grand scheme of things. Okay, everybody would like to win, but it's not a bad result to build from. To obviously 2 years later, at the height of what is disability sport, we finish fifth. There's only one place better, but my response is completely different. I wasn't very happy the next day, but as in it was more of the aspect of playing back into that shame or guilt as well. In comparison to everybody else, they've all got medals to show for it. I don't really have anything. And it took probably 10 years of retirement to kind of go, well, you have done quite an achievement and success is very subjective. It your
It
definition
is
would change.
subjective. Yes, it depends what you put onto it. Well, the reason that it's so important to say the word shame, guilt, and to name it when it comes around is because shame, guilt only has one defect. It dissolves the detection. It's like the magician. The jig is up. So once you know it and you see it, you can, get away. Don't mess with me. And it leaves because it can only be haunting you when you don't know it's there. That's very important to know. And that's why the word shame guilt I couldn't talk about maybe 15 years ago because we don't talk about that thing. And that makes it worse because it's given the opportunity to fester within us. And remember the Wizard of Oz?
What
Dorothy,
the original one then?
yeah, Dorothy goes up the yellow brick road, trembling, trembling as she sees the wizard. So she finally gets to the mountain and What does her dog do, little Toto?
Goes under the curtain.
He pulls the curtain back. And what do we see? A little old man, bald and gray, with a big, big machine and a big crank. And what's it doing? Puffing green smoke. Shame guilt's a puff of green smoke. It's just that we feel it's so big because it feels so horrible. But it feels so horrible because the energy is so deep and so dark. Whereas joy and happiness is lighter. Doesn't mean that shame guilt's more powerful. It just means it's a denser, heavier feeling. Not that it's more powerful.
Well, I think that's what a lot of the negative emotions, in terms of if you give it the position of
Importance.
importance, or you give credit of, I think there's a saying of which there's so many describers of, the ones that are on the shoulders of which beast do you want to feed? Do you want to feed the one that's ultimately your demise, or do you want to give the one that's obviously gonna give up? Well, I'll say from a lion's perspective, pride and things that you really you would fight and claw towards. Well, okay, this is possible. Or what if I stretch that beyond it? What could I really truly achieve? And ultimately, that's self-belief, self-esteem, and obviously self-confidence. And I've started to follow Deion Sanders a lot on social media because he says it as it is. And I think the best one that I ever saw at the very beginning was, don't define my confidence by your insecurities. And I went, wow, that's quite impactful.
Wow.
But
Wow.
in terms of, I think wherever that person's insecurity lies, is you could misinterpret somebody's overconfidence as arrogance. That, as a sports person with the Atlanta Falcons, Dallas Cowboys, he was probably a very, very flamboyant character and flashy cars, a lot of jewelry. You would think of people that is like, well, they're full of themselves. But it's like, well, if they've got such a belief within themselves that, I think I saw he in high school, he had nobody, not one member of his family went to go see him play a game. So he's got
Wow.
it. So that, as I've never had to experience that as a kid, that you've got to create an enormous amount of resilience that, okay, in a sporting arena, you are left to your own devices anyway. You are out there by yourself on an island, and ultimately you've got to show up and take on the opponent, or ultimately you're not going to have a very good day and you'll be riding the pine. But built on top of that, of I'm going to assume there's an element of shame and guilt that, compared to his teammates and classmates, I've got nobody in the stand here to support me beyond, obviously, friends, family members, classmates that have come to see the team as a whole, to then build. So I can see why he's such a strong force as an individual now, that you've kind of not allowed. And if people go and watch their content, he does talk about shame and guilt, probably from a different perspective, as I will not allow myself to have a bad day as a result of something in a moment. And some of these things are like, you're thinking, well, that's most of what he's saying is common sense, but why are people not doing it? It's like, I'm not going to allow having one bad moment.
Yeah, but we all have been so ingrained with our religion and our culture to feel this guilty, shameful mess. Like the church preaches, if you have guilt, it's a moral virtue because that's good. No, it isn't. It's nothing good about it, but it puts you in a lower dimension so they can, capitalize on you. And you don't feel good about it.
I
because
was
it's
I was talking about this with my physical therapist a couple of weeks ago,
oh, okay.
ironically. But we were talking in relation to AI and
Mhm.
where AI is going. I was like, well, you can't give it a moral compass. And you can't, because obviously, if religion is dictating that it looks like this, it's like, well, no, my morals and your morals could massively differ enormously. So who's to say that mine are right, you're wrong, yours are right, mine are. So to give it to a computer, the computer probably better find it because it probably go, well, no, all these things are immoral. Technically, if we were left to our own devices, you've lived through literally nuclear Armageddon. I haven't. I think we're pretty close at the
We're
moment.
pretty close. We're very close to Armageddon now. I mean, I remember going on the bus, teenager was 18 cents. Okay. And I went to the movies at a quarter with popcorn. Okay. So that's true. And I walked to school and I came home from school myself. And, there was never a fear of anything happening. It just, I was outside walking and I played dodgeball in the streets with my friend. It was totally different. I mean, it's just a shock every day for me. However, I believe that AI, especially the chat GPT or whatever it is truthful. I think they're telling the truth. I feel it. I think we'll become a more moral society because of AI. AI is continually to learn, and you can only learn at that rate with truth. And I believe that we will become more AI will be more truthful than you because AI doesn't have shame guilt, has no alternative motives. It's just, and I did that in my last newsletter. Why does AI become smarter than us? Because AI doesn't have the shame guilt, become immoral and not good enough. It's going to push us to get better. It's a different way of looking at it, and I believe that. Hey, I've done chat, not like everybody, a lot of it, but it's truthful, and that makes its own conclusion. So I asked them to do this and then this and then to compare, and it does it on a truth basis, not on a shame guilt basis. You got to know most writings are on a shame guilt basis, even though they don't know they are doing it. But we are so saturated with shame guilt words and our procedure of doing shame guilt that we're more shame guilt. AI is not in shame guilt, so it's going to be more of a genius quicker than us because shame guilt stops us from being our genius.
Well, it doesn't have to. It doesn't. It doesn't have to. I'm not going to say it doesn't have to think because that's not technically true, but as in it doesn't have a bias that's obviously been programmed into it.
Right, right.
That's like you and I have in terms of. I used to have a bad aspect of not getting things that people probably find it's hard to believe that I've never listened to 200 and something episodes plus, but as in I
Bless you,
would
my
I'd either it'd either have to be perfect or I would procrastinate on it, and obviously the two are
well,
there are
procrastination.
different words for shame and guilt because ultimately
Yeah.
I'm presuming or having a presumption that you will view me in a certain light based on, I don't know, what I've written, what I've said, etc. But what I've learned through coaching and I obviously teach to clients and everybody is like, come on, this there's always going to be a cause and effect. There's always going to be a risk or reward. What
Universal
decisions?
laws.
What do
Yeah.
you what do you want to do? Because ultimately, if I've got preconceived ideas, I might be 50% right. I'm not going to be 50% wrong because some people might even, and I'm lucky that I've got past experience of that in high school that because of having a disability, I thought, well, people are going to treat me differently. And I kind of went, no, I'm the one that's having to deal with, being sweaty, overheating. And people think it's like, well, what's the light bulb moment? It's like, well, I don't want to feel like this no more. And I think one particular podcast guest said, well, as a teenager, it's not different. No, that's how I felt. And this is a solution. So just a change it. For me, it was obviously incidental because it's a changing from slacks or jeans to shorts. Easy fix. I'm not going to solve it completely, but as in that's something that I've been able to do probably since 5-6 years old. Because my mom always likes to remind me of the story of me sitting on the periphery in elementary school, so primary school, watching all the other kids. There's an element of probably shame and guilt. Oh, why can't I do this now? But the cogs are turning as well. Okay, I can't do it like everybody else. James, you're going to have to be the first because I didn't know anybody like me.
This exactly what you're saying now is so important because we have to put the shame guilt in it. We have to find it to get rid of it. You can't, and to be aware of it. And that's what you've done. And that's how you grew emotionally because you actually saw it.
Well, I probably didn't categorize it. I probably didn't categorize it at that as a 5-year-old, though.
Yeah. So you're working more on a conscious level than an unconscious level. And that's what's so important to do that and to know that shame, guilt, feelings, or whatever you want to call them, can only take you down. So you have to get out of it as soon as you can. One client I had severe guilt because her mother passed from alcoholism. And she felt very guilty because she couldn't help her mother heal. Well, and I know that if a person doesn't really want to heal, they're not going to. It's not your fault. But, a daughter feels that way. I ask her to have regret instead of guilt because guilt has no solution because you're too stupid and not good enough to find a solution. That's what guilt means. You're not good enough to find a solution. Regret, oh, I regret I couldn't help my mother, but maybe I can help others. And so she started her lecture series and opened up a clinic for alcoholics and helping them to get back into their natural rhythm. And she was okay. But see, people say, oh, never regret anything. Well, that's better than guilt. Guilt has no solution. So I really want people to hear that we can't stay in guilt because we will always make the wrong choices. And you can regret something. You can be angry at somebody. You can be sad. It's okay. We can't be happy all the time because the shame guilt comes in. But we got to get out of the shame guilt that we do feel.
Should they then, Lois, reframe the animation of, the old person on the deathbed to talk about regret? Should you maybe instead of using the word regret for things that they maybe...
Oh, that's great, Jane. You're very smart. That's perfect because, I should have done this and I should have done that and that. Yeah, they have to reframe that. And that's why people, because I was, when I helping people, I'm going, why is everybody in this regret stuff? Now I know why, because that's how they picture the last moments. I regret I didn't do this. I regret, oh, I'm so sorry. I regret it. Regret's a good emotion if handled. I mean, I regret I couldn't do it. So I regret I put all my money in the stock and it went down. So I'm not going to do that anymore. Regret teaches us. Regret teaches us. Guilt doesn't teach us anything.
Well, I think it's because this is my opinion, so people can obviously challenge this by all means. I believe that obviously there's obsession with regret because obviously it's a negative emotion in comparison to, taking action and actually doing the things that you are passionate about and what's going to give you commitment to follow through with something. But I'm going to give credit to my family because they're very old school in terms of you don't get to do the jobs that you want to do, thus that you need to pay the bills. There's an element of shame and guilt in that as well. But in terms of, yes, on one hand, literally I could name all my family members and say it to me at one point in time. They're right, because that's what they've been conditioned to do. But I live in an age, or we live in an age now, that if you have any inkling towards, you could say we were in a credit crunch. Technically, it's true.
Yeah.
I could feel it. I could be despair as a result of that. But as a result of you and I talking on a computer, there's never been a more opportune time to make a side hustle. That if you are let's say you create something that people want on demand, poof, your life changes overnight. So
Very quickly. Very quickly.
so I think we touched on music, maybe consume less of the news because that's
Uh,
built on
shame
fear
guilt.
and all that,
And
and that's where they
fear
make the
is
money.
shame guilt. Fear is a double dose of shame guilt. Fear is locked in shame guilt. And that's what they use is fear. But it's shame guilt. So shame guilt dissolves in detection. So the jig is up.
But I think I don't know why there's that obsession towards being on your deathbed and regret. Well, I'm it's my birthday today as we're recording, so I'm 37. So it makes a change that make give myself the wrong age. But even I believe potentially sometime in the future there's going to be some aspects of wish I maybe did this or that or the other. I'm not going to name it, but I think because of one, the willingness to learn a little bit more about myself, there's a lot, there's probably, say, put it equivocally, equal, and that's been nice. I think there's probably there's more good than there would be bad. That I can look at things that I was able to accomplish and to be able to showcase that to people as a result of, I'll use the disability because that's probably the starting point. If I hadn't been born with a disability, I probably wouldn't have, in all likelihood, been a professional athlete to then be able to speak on the TEDx stage, to then doors of, as a result of all these things, have opened. I've just taken the path to step through them. What I think as, how old I've been, about 11, 12, there's an element of shame, guilt that, I want to be like everybody. Well, I can't be normal. My life would have been completely different as a result. If I was, I don't even need to rub a magic lamp and wish for it. I'm very appreciative of it as, okay, every day is not good and bad. There's going to be good and bads,
Yeah.
but I take that with a pinch of salt as a result, and this is not to boast in any way, shape, or form. I'll be humble on that account. I've probably been able to do in less than 4 years that maybe some people will never achieve in a lifetime. And that's quite scary.
Well, that gave you the motivation. And that's why I was able to do what I did because I had to conquer all these head injuries and traumas. And I learned that you just got to keep going. And the more I healed, I used so much energy to keep moving and raising my 3 children by having all these maladies that when I got well, I was like, my goodness, you can't stop me. I have all this energy, because I used so much energy just to keep moving. And then now without obstruction, my goodness, it's just phenomenal.
So
because you
would
push.
so
Go ahead.
would Lois, would you put and I do apologize for interrupting there for a second. Would you put you personally complaining in there as well with the shame guilt a little bit? You know,
Would I?
it's as in, you know, pointing the fingers, always moaning about it. It's obviously going to go into negativity to some extent to start with, if you always complaining.
No, I didn't feel sorry for myself. I just was always occupied with how am I going to heal? Because everybody says I'm going to die. So I was because, and it was true. I mean, my heart had a leaky valve, and I had all these brain. I couldn't go out in the sun. That's how many brain traumas
Oh
I had to
wow.
stay in the house, and I could only shop at night. And I had scoliosis so bad it crushed my heart and everything. So I didn't feel sorry for him. I remember I lost three miscarriages also, and then I had three babies, and then all of a sudden I remember driving one time, and I said, "Others are others, and I and me. Others are others, and I and me." And I just was occupied with who the heck's going to help my body because I know it's fixable, but nobody seemed to be able to do it until I found somebody. So that was my fixation. And I finally found somebody. But I didn't feel the poor me. I really never did. And I think that's unusual because I never felt myself sick. I just couldn't do this and I couldn't do that. But that didn't equate to being sick. It's interesting how my mind would work.
So is this maybe why it's dangerous if a person gets into that mindset of poor? Because that's obviously we're talking about victimhood a little bit more so than being a victim of.
Yeah, I just was, the mindset was this person doesn't know what they're talking about. So maybe I'll talk to this person. And they talked a little better, but not that. And I just kept on the mindset I wasn't sick. And I said, that's really weird. They say I'm dying, but I'm not sick. It was really interesting. And I never realized it until people like you, James, asked me about it because I never had the mindset of being sick until somebody said, didn't you feel sick? And I went, no, I just couldn't find the right doctor. I wasn't sick. And you're right. It's the mindset. And that's what carried me through it.
Right. It is a form of sickness mentality. If we want to put it as an attitude, you can
Yeah,
definitely layer that.
attitude.
You can definitely layer that as well. Have you lost all hope?
No, I
I wouldn't know what the other end of the spectrum would be. I think a lot of that. I think people are quick to use words and labels to
yes.
and okay, this has taken me decades to probably be able to realize to like, well, why? I've got a coffee mug in the kitchen for my zodiac sign, and one of the traits of a Taurian is lazy, and I'm going to do a video on it because it's funny. But on the mug itself, there's only two negative ones that I would take as negative if you were to take it as. I would never define myself as lazy. The acts of some of the things that I do, maybe, to maybe enjoy the weekend sometimes, maybe a little bit, maybe too much so. That's the circumstance of being lazy, but maybe the body could do with some rest.
Yeah. So it's the same thing, but I didn't sit down and say I have to change my mindset. It just was.
So why do you think this fixation between what is positive, negative, for people kind of going, well, I've seen it because ultimately it got me thinking, well, what's this obsession with being happy all the time, which obviously doesn't exist.
Well,
Everything is
it,
yin and yang.
it depends on the amount of shame guilt you're carrying because shame guilt's cumulative. Just because you're 40 or 50 doesn't mean you got rid of it when you're 10 and 12. It comes with you. It comes with you, and they call it middle age crisis. Now they call it other things, but in my world, when you were 50, and that's dementia and everything else. It's the shame guilt. It piled. So the more that you can release and the less that you can take on, that's where you have to make friends with your inner critic, because your inner critic is telling you all these things, but your inner critic's in the wrong timeline. He's living when you're 2 and 3, and now you're 33, 42. Hey, can you come into my timeline now? My inner critic calls himself King. And he decided that he didn't have to babysit me anymore with shame guilt, and he goes around the world finding me podcasts. So he changed his job. So your inner critic can change his job, but you can't tell him to do it. He has to come up with it, because that's narcissistic to do that to your inner personality parts. So everything is the amount of shame guilt you're carrying. It just is. Is there any healthy level? I don't think you should have any, but I haven't been able to get rid of all of it. So it's a process.
I don't think there'd probably be the person be very, very. I could generalize and say an introverted person. I would class myself as introverted, but I'm not. In comparison to what an introverted person doesn't really need anybody. They're almost like a.
That's shame guilt. It's a shame guilt. I don't need anybody. That's a shame guilt infection inside of that. Everything's shame guilt. When you sit down and you think about it, you go, everything is shame guilt that stops you from being you.
Is that because the individual is trying to I'm quite good at this, like rationalizing and giving logic to, well, if I can give you, I did this with I did it with a colleague, because he was very much into yoga type stuff and meditation. So I was like, oh, do you mind helping me with some of this baggage that I've got? I was willing to. Well, I wouldn't define it as that anymore, but as in my relationship between myself and my dad was not the best growing up. So but what I was doing on all very much like this was he'd ask me a question and I'd give it with a logical answer, and I went, no, you can't do that, James, because you're not really fully immersing yourself to, I won't say help, but as in to be able to have a greater understanding.
Got to be true to yourself.
Yeah. So I admitted to, hey, I'm lying to you. I'm lying to myself that I'm giving you a reasonable answer to the question, but I'm answering it with.
Really,
we don't get further down the line. It's just an answer. And he's like, well, yeah, I know, James. It's good that you can admit to that. And the exercise itself was weird because I had to be myself as a child and my dad, and that was just literally turning myself from one side. That was, but how long ago? That's about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer ago. But as a result, my relationship with my dad itself is better now, and those things are happening naturally as I haven't brought up a lot of things, but they're happening gradually.
There's no such thing as time. So you can always go back when you're 5 years old and talk to your 5-year-old self and work it out and get rid of the shame guilt that the 5-year-old is carrying. I did a film on talking to the inner personality parts and the inner critic. It's called Out of Discord into Harmony. And I have kid actors and a teenager as the inner critic. You'll get a kick out of it. But anyway, there's no such thing as time. So to tell your parents now what happened 20 years ago doesn't work because they're not the same person. You have to go back in time. And that's why it works.
Well, what I was watching yesterday is it builds upon what you've just said, Lois, of, there is no past. But it was one from a mind, depending on what level of understanding you had towards, I think, self-development or self-improvement. It was how you would be able to contact. I didn't listen to. I've saved it because I haven't watched it all because it was later at night. I was like, no, I'm gonna have to come back to this because otherwise it won't. I'm not gonna
We
get
do
those.
have a past, but there's no time, meaning that you can go back. You can time travel and go back and help the child of 5 years old. You can do that because there's no time. There's a past. So I say, you change the future by changing the present. You change the present by healing the past.
So I want to get your take on this then, and I'm gonna try to give as much context as I can from the TikTok. The person analyzed loads of successful people, and all these successful people had traumatic childhoods. Why isn't somebody that is, okay, quote unquote, unsuccessful, why are they not able to have the same connection between the two, from your personal opinion?
I may not understand the question, but you don't have to be abused to be a strong person. I know some people that are very strong, very smart, and they had a, fairly decent childhood. From my perspective, is that I had many, many obstacles. I stuttered. If you got brain traumas, you're going to stutter. And I had Erin syndrome because the words moved because of all the brain traumas. And I was called an idiot child because in 1950, nobody knew about dyslexia and Erin syndrome and stuttering. So, yeah. And they put me in the back of the class so that I wouldn't bother these smart people. Anyway, but it made me more independent. It depends on how you use your circumstances. I think that's the way to use it.
Do you think that that particular, it wasn't a very long video, do you think it's can be misconstrued and be manipulated to almost like shame as well? Oh, you're only unsuccessful because you haven't done it. It was more in the formative years, which is 0 to 7, and I went, well, in my life, other than not having a leg, I've not really faced that much trauma until I went into high school or middle school.
Can you just wait a minute? I smell something burning in the kitchen.
No problem.
No matter what I was given or not given, I would be successful because that's just who I am. I don't think you have to be abused to be strong. You have to do a little bit more work.
Well, that was the way, wasn't it? Though, in
Yeah,
I've only got to take I've got to take my aunt and my mother's experience from getting beaten at school for doing things badly, with the cane and things like that, and it's like, well, in some regard, maybe should they maybe bring it back, because then it would create a little bit of, I won't say fear, but as in there's a consequence if you do something bad. But in terms of what you've discussed today, Lois, in terms of, well, if you attach shame and guilt, I live in North Wales, so the language of Welsh was banned during when my mum and aunt went to school because it was subjugated under. Thus, you would be humiliated if you spoke the native language, which is through the people in my age group, they've slowly reintroduced it back. So that's also 40, 50, 60 years of, so I can't speak the language, but so there's an element of guilt a little bit because it's my mother's tongue. So I should be able to.
So reframe the guilt and
regret that I can't speak. I can speak two other languages, so it's still pretty fair going other than English. And Welsh is like no other language in the world. So, but nobody else in my family can speak Welsh either. But where I live in this part of North Wales is predominantly English speaking anyway. So, yes, I would like to at some point. I keep putting it off because it is so difficult. And there was only a moment in time where I worked in education, but I'd be in and out of the class because of my job as a teaching assistant. It'd only be based on if the pupil would needed, I don't want to call them special needs, as in they need additional needs based on, their writing isn't very good, or they're a bit slower learning in comparison to other. But my Welsh was better than some of the pupils. It's like you're in here almost every single day. I'm in and out maybe once a week, every 2 weeks. But maybe because I was more engaged to kind of go, well, okay, what does that mean? And same with the other languages, they're taught French. The teacher's retired now, but he found me very useful because it's an additional teacher because of my upbringing in my parents being deployed overseas in Belgium. I did from 3 to 16 years old in French.
Yeah, it was very interesting, James, when you said, I feel a little guilty about that. Your head went down. And then when you said, oh, I can use regret, your head came up. So it does affect us when we say, I feel guilt. It activates that frequency within you.
Well, subconsciously, isn't it? But I've leaned into, what's the name of the book? It's by Trevor Marwood. It's It Takes What It Takes. And his dad was very into positive thinking. To the point that they didn't even listen to country music when he was growing up. But he's got into more of this. He's very, very big within the NFL teams, working with them with all their stuff. But he was like, you need to have this middle ground where I don't like how more of the mindfulness tools do it. They like it doesn't matter. It's like, well, if it doesn't matter, why am I thinking about it? But that's how my mind works. If it's positive, that's wonderful. If it's negative, probably how I used to be, what reframe it is, how do we get from the bad to the good? Whereas maybe I'll probably lean into it as you're talking about, as like the healing process, as, hey, it's something's testing me. Why don't I have a greater understanding of it? So thus, when it occurs more and more, it has less imposing power over me.
Because you can use regret as negative. You can use angry. I'm angry at that guy. I hate that guy. You can use negative emotions because they're part of us and you have to express yourself. Just don't use guilt to express yourself. That's what I'm saying. All positive is not good and all negative. I mean, you got to just, because you're a combination of both until you're singularity robot. So, but I'm saying just don't use the word shame. Don't use the word guilt because it brings your whole face went down. When you said, I regret, you had your head up. Yeah, I regret that. And I did this and I did that. Guilt, no solution. It's amazing. It's amazing how it affects us energetically.
Well, it's the spoken language, and think because of that book, I think Trevor is a sports psychologist by trade. It's 10 times as more ammunition if you were to. So it probably had more of a negative. I didn't even notice until you told me. I probably, if you were to watch this episode as opposed to listen to it, you'd probably see I wasn't aware of it, and probably my frequency as a result probably dipped in maybe a notches or two. But
very interesting. And then when you go to church and you guilt it and you did that, and you should have guilt to repent. I mean, my goodness, you had a horrible Sunday already, you know? Anyway, that's enough of that one. But anyway, if you have a chance, watch Out of Discord into Harmony. It's on my YouTube channel.
Okay.
And you think you'll probably enjoy that, talking to your inner self.
Well, I think that is it Disney or Pixar did something similar.
Similar to it, but this is much deeper because I talk to the inner critic. Unless you talk to the inner critic, I mean, if you want something to change, you talk to the boss or the one that parks the car. You talk to the boss. You think you run your life. You don't run your life. Your inner critic runs your life unconsciously, has more power than you. So you have to make friends with your inner critic because he or she will, he's in charge, but he's in the wrong timeline. So it talks to you about how to do that.
Well, I think as a result of that, Lois, this is my understanding, you're almost like a byproduct of, if I use it from a geneticist point of view, and then a different, more or less complicated perspective, is I think it's 17 generations are encoded into your DNA. So technically that's 17 other people.
Yeah.
And aspect that's you've had no choice whatsoever to be as in you would probably go, no, don't want that in that. Can we change that sequence slightly? But that's something that I've almost had a fascination to learn more about. As okay, I've had I wouldn't say my trauma is anywhere near yours, and that's just my opinion. But how does my trauma relate to my mother's and my aunt's? Because they lost their father at 15 years old, which is, and that would have been in the 60s.
Okay. You don't analyze it from their perspective. You analyze it from the little kid inside of you. See, traditional people would do, well, how did your mother do that? You have to talk to your inner self. How did your inner self respond to it? Not you, James. George, who's inside of you. I see a George there. So you're doing the mind therapy. You got to do the heart therapy. The heart therapy is talking to your inner self, and you have an inner family. And the person in charge is the inner critic.
Well, I think that's the obsession people have, isn't it? I need to not talk myself out of it. I need to create a thought to work myself out of it, which I think a lot of people think of rationale and logic as well. If I can,
but that doesn't heal. It's only in the mind. Therapy it should not be in the mind. It's in the heart, and because the heart connects to the soul. You got to do the inner self, right? And the doggy's good. So anyway, watch that. It'll be interesting. Let me know. Keep me in charge.
I will do. Well, I think the intuition of how I've probably worked my way into it gradually is I had issues with anxiety a couple of years ago. But it was a build-up of what you're talking about, the manifestation of probably years of shame and guilt as well, in comparison to, that's why I say success is very subjective. My definition of it 10 or so years ago would have been a shiny object to find, oh, did I get a gold medal at the height of my powers? Oh, is it a success? No. I had this inability to not, I'd put things on the back burner, I'll deal with that thing when the time comes.
Yeah, and that's okay, because everybody has a time clock whenever they need to work. So that's immature. You just can't rationalize and solve it by your brain. You got to talk within yourself.
Well, I think it's that I think the pandemic showed it a little bit, like in the beginning, that people were willing to, oh, if it's only going to be like 6 weeks, I'll
Yeah.
do some inner work. I'll be okay with.
Yeah. I'll do a weekend seminar.
But I saw it's like no, it's can't.
It's
Most human beings have been conditioned thanks to convenience. I won't name any of the companies, but through convenience that, oh, if I do it, pay for it today, I get it tomorrow, or more extreme, it's probably literally same day now. So everything else as a result will happen overnight. It's like, well, health and fitness doesn't work like that. Mental stuff doesn't work like that. Healing yourself won't work overnight, because if we're talking about, in my case, probably 20 decades, 2 decades with, I don't know how many, 20 decades would be, but as in 2 decades worth of
yeah, it takes
living up
time.
to unrealistic expectations of myself based on maybe an understanding of other people's
Yeah. I mean, it's good to
expectations.
get the understanding in your brain. There's nothing wrong with that, but the healing takes place inside yourself when you talk to yourself. Out of out of discord into harmony. Yep. It'll be fun.
Well, I think it's difficult because, not me personally, but I think that a lot of people live for the weekend. Oh, I hate my job. Monday to I'm generalizing because some people might like their job, but they still think the weekend
No, but
more.
that is true.
But they what they're doing as a result is they're using, going out drinking, doing other substances as an escapism. It's like, well, you're not really gonna
But
ever heal because you're not willing to deal with what.
everybody's not ready to heal. So that's just the way it is. You know, everybody has to do what everybody needs to do. You can't, you know, that's everybody has choices, and you know, this was my choice for this lifetime. So, and yours too. So, but not everybody has the same choices.
Well, I think because I hit rock bottom, and
Pardon?
I think for me it's because I'd hit rock bottom, and
Yeah, that's
there was no going any lower. There probably was, but
yeah, but
I think
you know,
I think for me it was like, well,
pull
this
the
here,
reins back. This is it. This is
this is as far as I want to go. The only way is up, and it was through speaking with a counselor that
mhm,
I was able to work through those
a
things,
lot of things. Yeah,
and
good.
then as a result, be presented with meditation at the time, because my perspective towards it before that was like, is this woo woo, is like, we'll call it Wizard of Oz type of thing. It's like, oh, this will not in the real world of where I live. I haven't got the dedication that maybe Buddhists have.
Well,
I can't put aside that, but I was willing to. I think because I was so low, I was like, well, what have I
talking
got
with
to lose?
talking within yourself is really a meditation. You're communicating with your inner self. That is a meditation. So I can't do a nondescript whatever. My brain, my I take my children with me, my kids.
So my final question I'd like to ask you today, Lois, and I like to ask this of every guest: if you got to sit down with any, I'm gonna call it loosely coach, for that matter, who would that be and why?
Well, I have a different answer for that because people ask that a lot. I've never had a coach and I've never had a mentor. Not that I haven't followed somebody, and understood their philosophies and I learned something, but they weren't my coach. They weren't my mentor because nobody went as far as I did. It, I wanted always to go further and know everyone had their limit, so to speak. Nothing bad. It's just that I can't say that person's my mentor or I had a coach. I do a lot of spiritual writing. I just sit down, God talks, and I write. I'm the secretary. And the only thing I can say is I follow the footsteps of Jesus. He's the only one that never disappointed me. I'm very serious. I'm not joking. That's very serious. I've met some incredible beings. And
my last question before we go, Lois, if you had to summarize what we've spoken about today into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
Shame guilt is not ours to own or to give.
So, Lois, once again, thanks again for coming on the Mindset Athlete podcast.
It was fun. I enjoyed it. I think we'll speak again.
Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode and got loads from it. Anything that was included and discussed will be available in the show notes below. And I would love to hear from you. Come and connect and ask your questions. I've been James Roberts from jamesowenroberts.com. Remember this quote by Chris Harth. An athlete is a mindset. It's how you prepare, think, and execute, not by some elite status or physical stature. Anybody can be an athlete.